At Eastern Bank, we believe that growing business should also grow the community. That's why we work to give all business owners what they need to take their dreams to the next level. Our dedication to small businesses and communities has inspired us to create the Equity Alliance for Business program and become the #1 SBA lender in Massachusetts for 15 years running. We're proud to be here for all businesses, big and small. See the good we can do for you by visiting easternbank.com/business.
This is what it sounds like.
Member FDIC.
In late 2007, the remains of a young woman from the Kaska Nation were discovered in the Yukon woods.
I always think about, I want to know what really happened.
So I travel north to try to understand what happened and who was involved.
It's a pretty big risk to come forward with the information that I have.
I'm David Ridgen, and this is Someone Knows Something, Season 8, The Angel Carlick Case. Available now.
Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. Filling in for Shirley Young this week, I'm Kimberly Atkins-Storr. With the feverish coverage of the presidential race, it's easy to forget that control of both the U.S. House and Senate are up for grabs in November, and the stakes could not be higher. In courts across the country, a war is being waged on something called the administrative state. Conservative groups are using legal actions to undermine the powers of federal agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These challenges make it harder for those federal agencies to make rules that keep our air and waters clean, our banks honest, and our medications safe and available. Congress can stop this war, but only if those willing to do it are elected. So I want to discuss this fight and what could happen and what voters can do about it. So today I'm joined by two experts who can help explain what's going on. Emily Hammond is a law professor at George Washington University, and Devin Ombres is a legal expert with Cap Action. Welcome, both of you, to Say More.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
So, Emily, I want to start with you, and I want to start this conversation by explaining what the administrative state is for non-lawyers, non-wonks like us. I want to get an idea of what that means, because it can sound boring, but it's something that affects every single American.
I like to think of it as having three facets. You're right that it's a sort of sanitized term, but the three meanings are these. The first is there is a sort of technical constitutional meaning where the administrative state refers to the executive branch of our government. It's headed by the president and populated by a lot of people who are confirmed by the Senate, for example, or otherwise appointed by the president. Also, of course, with civil service employees. And there are rules about what that facet can do, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. The second facet is it's just a way of organizing our society to get things done. Things like making sure our cars are safe to drive, making sure our water is safe to drink, making sure that people get things like Social Security. Of course, there's also things we don't like paying taxes, which is on the horizon. The third thing that I like to remember about the administrative state, it's people. It's people in our communities who just work for the government. I think back to the first time I ever did any public speaking. I was in fourth grade, and it was for 4-H. 4-H is a program run by the Department of Agriculture. I had no idea, of course, that it was something the government was doing, but it illustrates the very real way that everyone in our country interfaces with what the government is. That administrative state is just people, like all of us, doing jobs.
So if I can just take a step back, because we keep saying the administrative state, and that's a really great way to describe a giant nebulous blob that doesn't really affect the way, and it's easy to rile up anger against an administrative state and the so-called faceless bureaucrats. But Emily, you had a great point. It's the people. It's the park rangers when you go to national parks. It's the fish and wildlife folks who are making sure that people aren't poaching. It's the guys making sure that the trains and the planes and the cars are all safe, that your drugs are safe. And so I don't love the phrase administrative state because it's too easy to villainize. And it's really just these agencies that are steeped in expertise, people that have developed years and years and years of deep knowledge who are really just doing their damnedest to make sure that society stays on the rails. And the thing that you're seeing a lot of pushback against it from conservative groups, right-wing groups, corporatists, corporations, because regulations, they say the horrible red tape that is inflicted upon corporations, it at the end of the day, it drops a profit margin from major corporations. You don't see a lot of quite as many little guys fighting the so-called administrative state, and it's really just a matter of wanting more power. And we can get into it a little later, but this Supreme Court term is absolutely wild in the breadth of attacks they're making on the ability of government to function and effectively trying to wipe out, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, about 100 years worth of progress and the way that modern society functions. Like it's really striking the breadth and depth at which these attacks are coming, and they're coming very quickly. And because they're so unpopular, they're doing it through the courts so that the spotlight of electoral politics and executive action is not shown on them.
So I just want to dig in a little bit, Devin, on what you were talking about, that the reason that a lot of business groups, conservative groups are really trying to rein this power in is because at the bottom line, it can be bad for their businesses. How does that work? Are you saying that the more safety rules, for example, that there are over certain products, or the more regulations over banks, it makes it harder for these companies to make money?
So, I mean, let's go back to the 1970s when the Ford Pintos were exploding all over the place. It was the NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, and the Department of Transportation that was making sure that those were safe. And so, seatbelts, windshield wipers, these are things that have been introduced over time to make sure that people are safe. And you know what? Every single one of those things that are added on to, each vehicle is an incremental cost. And that incremental cost can either be passed along to the consumer, or it can be taken out of the bottom line profitability.
Yeah. So, and it gets down to this idea. I think a lot of the critics of an expansive look at administrative agencies say, well, look, basic constitutional principles, right? It's Congress that makes laws, and it's the executive branch that carries out these laws. The executive branch shouldn't be making the laws. And Emily, you recently testified before a congressional hearing that was all about the idea of pulling back the executive power and putting it back in the legislature. And also testifying at that hearing was Jonathan Wolfson. He's chief legal officer at the Cicero Institute. And this is what he said.
Basic Schoolhouse Rock civics lessons teach us that Congress makes laws and the president executes and enforces those laws. But members of this subcommittee know that isn't really the reality. Unfortunately, the executive branch and independent federal agencies regularly make new laws, and at times regulatory agencies even act without any congressional authority at all.
So going back, I'm a Gen Xer. I remember I'm just a bill. The laws are made in Congress. Doesn't he have a point there, Emily?
I think what his argument misses is what anybody at any agency understands, which is agencies don't exist but for the authorization that Congress has provided. They cannot do things that Congress has not authorized. And even if Congress has authorized something, if Congress hasn't funded it, the agency cannot do it. So agencies, when they, for example, make requirements that we've been talking about, are carrying out the mandate that Congress gave them when it passed various laws. Now, people might disagree over how the agency exercises the discretion that it does have to do that carrying out of Congress's laws. But as we were just saying, a reason agencies have some discretion is because they're the experts. Congress, when it gives agencies things to do, is saying, experts, you please look at this issue. And so, yes, people might disagree about how an agency does that. And that's usually about policy more than science or technology. But the idea that they're just running off on frolics and detours without any authority really just doesn't line up with the way our system is structured.
So we understand what this quote unquote war looks like. How does the battle begin? How does someone file a challenge to something, say, that the Food and Drug Administration is doing, seeking to try to roll back the power of the FDA to act as they have been acting?
So in general, anyone, whether that's an individual or a business or a nonprofit, who is, and the language is aggrieved by what the agency has done, as long as they can show that they have in some way been injured or would be injured by an agency's regulation, then in general, they can sue the government after 60 days. There's a law called the Administrative Procedure Act that kind of sets up the requirements for that. And they can file in federal court. Often it's in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, because that's where so many agencies are located. But the different kinds of statutes have other possibilities. And so you can wind up with challenges to agency actions all over the country, just depending on what it is and where people are located.
I'll add that there's also currently a challenge to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That has been a target for years, and that's the agency that has outlawed things like repeated overdraft fees. If somebody has $20 in their bank account and there is an outstanding $20 check, but also two $2 checks, it keeps banks from passing the $20 one first so that they can charge you overdrafts twice for the $2 ones. And that can rack up hundreds of dollars in fees for the people who can afford it the least, things like that. One of the cases that's before the Supreme Court this year has to do with fishermen in New England. And when they go out on their vessels, whether the monitor who is on board to make sure that these waters aren't overfished, whether the monitor is paid for by the fishermen or whether it's paid for by the government. So rather than going through the process and appealing to the federal agency saying, hey, is there a way that we can get some relief from this? Because it can be pretty expensive. It can cost hundreds of dollars and eat into these fishermen's profits. And having the agency say, okay, well, maybe we can give a waiver in some situations, which they did. Instead, the entire rule is being challenged, and there is an effort to really roll back the ability of the federal agency to even make these rules in the first place. It's kind of taken a hammer at something that you can go into with an X-Acto blade to sort of find that proper balance.
As a recently reformed Hill staffer, there was a hearing I worked on last year about smog and climate change and things like that. And I looked back before the EPA Clean Air Act. If y'all remember the Canadian wildfires, how just awful air quality was last summer. You couldn't go outside. You couldn't breathe it. I did some historical research on that. I'm not a scientist. I'm a lawyer. But 1 in 3 days in most cities east of the Mississippi back in the 60s and 70s, that's what the air quality was, or worse.
Wow.
When you couldn't breathe, when you got a sore throat walking outside. That's what life was like before the EPA and the Clean Air Act came in. And the fun fact is there is a case before the Supreme Court called EPA versus Ohio this term, in which a number of states and polluting industries are trying to say, hey, EPA, you guys can't regulate smog pollution across state lines. And if anybody here loves smog pollution, please raise your hands. Not if you're driving, keep your hands on the wheels. But, you know, they're trying to say you can't regulate smog anymore. It blows my mind.
More of my conversation with Devin and Emily after this short break.
At Eastern Bank, we believe in good business. That's why we provide clients with a suite of products and services made to take their businesses to the next level. From express business loans to seamless cash management solutions, we make it easy to grow when the time is right. As a trusted full-service bank and the #1 SBA lender in Massachusetts for 15 years running, we understand what you need to keep your business thriving. See the good we can do for you by visiting easternbank.com/business.
This is what it sounds like.
Member FDIC.
So let me ask this. If so many of these things are affecting what we're talking about, bank fees, clean air, protecting small businesses and all this stuff, why hasn't it been a top campaign issue when every single member of the House goes up for re-election and every 6 years, the members of the Senate go for re-election? If these are the people who can pass laws that can make clear, no, we really mean to give these agencies this power. We're going to be as explicit as possible about it, but we can only do that if you elect us. Why isn't that a big talking point, Devin?
One, a lot of it is because it's the status quo. It's what has been happening, and people don't perk up unless something bad happens. The point of this is to hit government with a hammer and then run on saying, hey, look, government doesn't work. I'm going to hit it with a hammer. And I've been saying this for a minute, but when you talk about administrative law, it is a Schedule I regulated narcotic. It puts most people to sleep. So try to make it exciting, but it's just not something that's going to be real useful on the campaign trail unless you use it as kind of like a big boogeyman and say, here are the things that are going to happen if these guys get elected.
Do you think it's just the fact that Republicans have done a better job and conservatives have done a better job in campaigning on the courts, just in general, the need to have good conservative judges and the need to have rollback, unruly government in a way that Democrats who tend to want to oppose these attacks on the administrative state have not had the same kind of effective campaign message?
I mean, I think that's true to a great sense because the Republicans have historically marched in lockstep and have these simple concepts that regulation bad, freedom good, but Democrats live in the nuanced world where regulation provides you the freedom to be able to do the things you want without being imposed upon by other people, and as opposed to a Lockean state of nature where life is short, brutish, and cruel. And I think it's important that we get back to that. But the fact of the matter is also, it's a hell of a lot easier to break things than it is to build things. And Democrats consistently want to build, and it takes work and sustained effort to do it. And it's a lot easier just to hit something with a hammer and say it doesn't work.
So the election in November, it's not just about who wins the presidency, which of course is how the people in these agencies are accountable because they're a part of the executive branch under the president, but also members of the House and members of the Senate. So if control goes to Republicans in the election of one of both of these houses versus Democrats, Devin, how do you think that makes a difference in terms of the ability of federal agencies to do the work that they do?
I think it will significantly hinder them. You will see
if it's Republicans in control.
If it's Republicans in control, you're going to see a massive lack of enforcement. You're going to see a purge of experts and civil servants. You're going to see massive funding cuts to the agencies that protect us. And you're going to see an entrenchment of political types who will, even if a new administration comes in, a different administration comes in, won't leave. And so I don't want to be catastrophic or apocalyptic because even if all these cases come down against agency authority, it's not the sky is falling, but we're sure as hell all frogs in a boiling pot. And the Supreme Court is turning up the heat every day. And it's going to take about 10 years for the full impact of these changes to hit us. And by then, it's going to be too damn late.
And Emily, there's also in the Senate, there's the power to appoint, or as we've seen in recent years, block judges from being appointed. And that the makeup of the federal judiciary is important here too, right?
That's right. The Senate is the gatekeeper there. And so future appointees will have a lot to say about what the law looks like. And can I just add one thing about Congress as well? Congress has the power to say to the Supreme Court, Actually, we disagree with you. We think EPA actually can regulate those wetlands, and we're going to make that clear in an amendment to the Clean Water Act. Mm-hmm. Congress can do that. Congress actually has the power to rein in some of these really expansive Supreme Court opinions that we're seeing, and that's a reason those elections are so important. Because if we'd like to see a check on what the Supreme Court is doing, we could look to Congress to do that if there are a majority of folks in Congress willing to do it, if we put them there.
How do we get people to care about this stuff? You know, it can be dry. It can be, very technical. But one thing that I learned in law school and why I loved admin law, it was actually my best grade, was the fact that, no, this is real stuff that affects real people. And I liked that. How do we get people to focus on that part of this?
I think there's a very individualized aspect of how to make a difference in this climate that we're in. And it almost makes me kind of go back to that world of 4-H, right? As a kid, I'm in this very rural area growing up. And no matter what people's politics were, we were all learning how to be public speakers and interfacing with somebody that we really liked who happened to be funded by the government. So I think that bringing it back to what impacts people personally and really talking from an understanding of what people care about and having conversations about what kinds of strategies are going to meet the needs that they have is part of what we could be, the collective could be doing better and differently.
What about you, Devin?
I love that answer, Emily. It's so true that we don't have empathy anymore. And the thing, I'm from South Florida. I have a lot of family and friends down there that are very much on the other side of the political spectrum than I am. And we've had some difficult conversations. And the one thing that I always try and ask is why? Why do you think that? To help me better understand, but also to help those folks have a little bit of introspection as to where they're coming from and why they might be acting against their own personal interests. So I think just being willing to have those conversations, being open, but also being able to ask the why question and either, accept it and explain it and just have that conversation is just crucial.
Devin Ombres is a legal expert with Cap Action. Thank you so much for joining us, Devin.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
And Emily Hammond is a law professor at George Washington University. Emily, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer with help from Scott Hellman. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. Our music is from APM Music. And if you like our show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Kim Atkins-Storr. Thank you for listening.